Hi folks, it's Tino here with a January transfer window special on the back of what has been, quite frankly, certainly in fans' opinion at least, been a shambolic transfer window from a Celtic point of view. If there are any Celtic fans happy with the business that we've done, I've yet to see them, either in person or online. But to hopefully help us make some sort of sense of what's going on, we're joined here once again by Anthony Joseph, Sky Sports News. Anthony, great to have you back on the show. Sure, it's been a busy few weeks for you as always at this time of year. So how's it all been from your side of things?
Yeah, Tino, no, thanks for having me back on first. Always a pleasure. It's been very busy, as in it always is. And while in terms of deals going through in England, Scotland, and the rest of Europe, it might have been quiet compared to what has been in the past. That doesn't take away from how busy it is for us journalists who are still chasing everything that doesn't come off as well. So that whether that's interest in a player, monitoring a player, approaches made, things that bids rejected, and whether when you're discussing with contacts, whether we're able to report them as well. So it doesn't take away from how busy we are. And yeah, I am quite shattered today and looking forward to a break.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that basis, thanks for joining us again. I know you're officially on holiday now for a week or so. So hopefully after this one, you can manage to relax. You mentioned, of course, you and the team there at Sky Sports, Anthony, very busy during this time. The market, less so, I think it's fair to say. You can correct me on my figures here, but I was hearing something like around about 80 million or so has been spent down south versus 800 million this time last year. And you can let me know how accurate I am or not with those figures. But what do you think that's down to? Is this, the whole financial sustainability regulations that replaced financial fair play? Are teams like, Forest and Everton and other clubs like that stressing about recent penalties? Is there a reason why that's going on?
Yeah, so in England, in the Premier League, profit and sustainability rules is the new name for FFP, and there's a slight change of the structure of it and how it works over a 3-year period, and also just how the cut-off dates. So the cut-off dates are from the 1st of July till the June the 30th. So what a lot of clubs in England, especially in the Premier League, they spent a lot in the summer. So they need to be at least within £105 million debt to be within the regulations for the financial year under profit and sustainability rules. So that's why we haven't seen as much spending in England. And yeah, it's just huge. I mean, Chelsea, there's a reason it was 800 million last January, because Chelsea just went wild. But it's also the reason why most of the top clubs didn't make moves and didn't make big moves.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And, I think some, from a Celtic point of view, we're trying to defend Celtic's lack of activity by saying, listen, it's just the market. Just now, there's just not a lot going on. It's not just Celtic. But for me, that would be an easy out for Celtic, given the club maybe too many excuses. But listen, we'll get into the detail of it, Anthony, and we can get your own, I suppose, personal and professional opinion as we go along. I want to start by covering Celtic's incomings. It won't take us long. We've only got 2 guys to cover. One's the permanent deal for Nicolas Kuhn. The other is the loan signing, which was confirmed last night, of Idah from Norwich City. So we'll start with the Nicolas Kuhn chat. Anthony, he's obviously a winger from Rapid Vienna, made his debut just last week, 30 minutes or so. Hard to tell too much at this point. But what was your general understanding of that deal and how it all played out?
Yeah, well, from the start of January, it was pretty clear that he was the main target that they were going for first, and that he'd been tracked for quite some time during the season and was showing a lot of promise and a lot of potential, and could add what Rodgers was wanting in terms of quality, add strength and depth, and actually be pushing for a starting place rather than what has been previously signed mainly in the summer of project signings, which has been the tagline for a number of the summer signings. So I think credit where it's due, and there perhaps is very little credit to be given out over this transfer window for Celtic, but they got they got one of their main targets in, and that was Nicolas Kuhn. Might have not have been in what is deemed as a priority position, as we all know that left back and striker were the two priority positions for this window. But they managed to get what they see as a winger who is going to add more quality to that department. And also, when you look at possibly, well, you saw Mikey Johnston leave, James Forrest is aging, and there are question marks over Liel Abada's long-term future. I think Kuhn is potentially a long-term replacement for Liel Abada.
Yeah, and that itself would be interesting. There was a lot of noise about Abada. Stephen McGowan of the Scottish Daily Mail put something out maybe a fortnight or so ago suggesting that a loan move away might be best for all parties, but it never came to fruition, and I never actually heard of any clubs formally being in for him. I'm not sure if you've heard anything there, but just to stay on Kuhn for a moment, do you know of any competition that Celtic faced for that one? Was it a straightforward kind of deal? The player was keen to come, the club were keen to make it happen, and it all went through quite smoothly?
Yeah, I think there was a few clubs in Italy and Germany that were interested in him, but as far as I'm aware, once Celtic had made their move, he wanted to join Celtic. So I don't think they were in any kind of bidding war. I know the Rapid Vienna sporting director, Marcel Katzer, was perhaps maybe trying to drum up a bit more interest, saying, "Oh, we've got a number of concrete bids in for him." There might have been a number of approaches, but certainly from what I was hearing in terms of actual bids, Celtic were the only club that came in with concrete offers.
Yeah, there was a suggestion that Celtic were maybe hardballing over a couple of $100,000. Don't know if that's just paper talk. Anything on that? Did we go in with a lower bid and then finally agree something?
I think it's a grey area over that. I think Celtic maybe came in with an approach and an idea of a figure. My understanding is there was no official bid rejected, but that doesn't mean that they didn't come in with a lower offer, which often most clubs would do, and then they negotiate. At no point did negotiations break down, or was there a bid rejected. From what I understand, it was pretty smooth in terms of Celtic coming in with the approach, negotiations taking place over a few days, agreeing a £3 million fee, and that was it became a formality after that.
Yeah, that all sounds fair enough. I was just looking for a headline or a bit of drama or something that I can beat the board up with at this moment in time, just given how we're feeling. But no, fair enough. Sounds like they targeted Nicolas Kuhn, as you say, Anthony. Not perhaps a priority position, but a key player, and hopefully he'll kick on. Let's see, what we get from him this weekend up at Pittodrie and beyond. The next, and sadly the only other signing, is Idah. So a lot of chat over the last few days, but finally confirmed fairly late last night, around about 11:30 last night, by the club, that he's now arrived on a loan deal from Norwich. Centre forward, Republic of Ireland international. Interestingly, Anthony, it's a straight up loan with no option to buy. We've got a few questions which we'll get to at the further on in the recording, but Dean has asked the question, and I'll take your own opinion on this. Do you think the structure of such a deal means that Celtic have potentially got someone lined up in the summer, i.e., is Idah just a stopgap for the remainder of this season, with someone potentially, a Matthias Kviesgaarden, for example, being the big signing, the big striker signing in the summer?
I don't think it means they've got someone lined up. I think what it means is that this is just a short-term fix. I think that's the only reading we can take into Idah signing on loan with no option to buy. So it doesn't mean they can't bid for him in the summer if it's a successful loan move, but they don't have the first or exclusive option, which to me, speaking as a Celtic fan and just an outside observer, that seems quite strange. It's always nice to have that first option to if he ends up banging them in and scoring on all fronts and scoring for the Republic of Ireland in the March internationals, that kind of thing. So that seems strange, but I guess he is just being seen as cover for O while O is away. So at the moment, Idah would be seen as third choice when O comes back, unless he starts playing well and doing well in training and pushing himself up the pecking order. So, I mean, that can happen, which is why I felt it was maybe strange that no option to buy was included. But I guess Celtic just wanted to get the deal done, and that might have been at the Norwich end not wanting an option to buy. It just allows other clubs to have a better chance with him if he does do well, and Celtic don't have that exclusive option. So in terms of having someone lined up or Wiesgarden, I mean, my understanding, it all went quiet on Wiesgarden after the summer, really. Would Celtic bring him in the summer again? They'd be in the middle of their season over there, wouldn't they? It would be, clubs like that might not want to sell straight away in the summer. It might be a late one again. I certainly, things went cold on Wiesgarden, and I haven't heard anything more on that. So that's just me responding to that question directly. I'm not saying that anything's happened there or anything's going to happen there, but I don't think you can read too much into Adam Idah being on loan at Celtic with no option to buy, other than it's just a short-term fix.
Yeah, I know, fair enough. I'd mentioned on our weekly show at the top of this week that I'd be speaking to you, today after the transfer window closed. And I joked at the time that it was potentially going to be a very short episode based on Celtic's lack of activity. If we're just covering incomings, Anthony, that'd be us done. 10 minutes in, bit of chit-chat, couple of signings and good to go. But obviously there's a whole lot more at play in terms of a transfer window. It's not just about the business you bring in, albeit that would be the most exciting thing from a Celtic fan point of view. There's lots of guys we potentially tried to get in, guys that we tried to move out, guys that we did move out, and other deals that fell through for a variety of reasons. So pretty keen to cover that with you over the next half hour or so in terms of your own insights as to what generally went on for Celtic. But just as a general question before we do crack on with that, do you feel that the club have been frustrated in their efforts? Obviously, they'll keep their own counsel on how it all went overall. Fans in general will be the last to know. But do you feel the club will have been frustrated, both in terms of incomings and outgoings over the last 4 or 5 weeks or so?
Yeah, 100%. They will be very frustrated, especially for incomings, because they went into this window wanting a left back and a striker, and then they ended up needing a left back even more urgently due to Greg Taylor's injury. So even before Greg Taylor was injured, they were wanting to get a left back in. So they looked at a number of players. There was a number of targets, Owen Beck obviously being one of them. Celtic were at the stage of, I think maybe on the 20th of January, before Liverpool played Bournemouth anyway, the day before that, were sort of making headway there, and through intermediaries that there's a chance if he doesn't play for Liverpool. And over the weekend, Robertson and Tsimikas return from injury well and return to training well, then there's a good chance Owen Beck can join Celtic, whether that was on loan or even possibly a permanent deal was being explored at this point as well. But he came on for a whole, 7 minutes, 8 minutes? Yep. When Liverpool were 3-4 goals up against Bournemouth, and scuppered everything. So that meant he could only play, due to the rules that you can only play for 2 clubs in one season, he could only play for Liverpool or Dundee. So Dundee, if he was going to leave Liverpool, Dundee was the only option. There's still a chance, I guess, for Celtic to revisit that in the summer, but there's a chance. I mean, a lot of Championship clubs were looking at Owen Beck as well in England. So if he has another good second half of the season, Celtic could face competition if they are still looking at Owen Beck. But in terms of striker options, in terms of the disappointment overall, they've missed out on the 2 key positions that they wanted to fill. So there's going to be disappointment. My understanding is the targets they went for just weren't available or didn't work out. They were not back. They weren't going to make any progress with those. It got to maybe midway through the window, and sort of the briefing was it's looking likely it's going to be a loan deal if they're going to get a left back and a striker in. So that they went into the loan market, looking around Europe, looking at English Premier League, Championship, and they weren't able to get their left-back options, or they managed to get Adam Idah as a striker option. The circumstances of that, a bit funny in terms of how Sidney van Hooijdonk, who has been his father and agent Pierre van Hooijdonk, Celtic icon, has been quoted in Italy as saying that they were waiting for Celtic to come in. They delayed approaches from other clubs. Bologna when Bologna were getting approaches from other clubs. But Celtic made no contact. My understanding is Celtic didn't come in with any approach for Sidney van Hooijdonk in the January window. So when Norwich came in, it was quite late, and it was late in the week. So Van Hooijdonk was happy to go and proceed with that and to sign for Norwich, and that paved for Norwich to do that deal. They needed to get Idah off, and that was their plans, to get Idah away, and that opened the door for Celtic to come in and get Idah, which understandably a lot of Celtic fans are not happy about. When they knew that Sidney van Hooijdonk was someone they've been monitoring for quite a while, when you see the player's side quoted as saying that they were waiting on Celtic to come in, and knowing that there was no contact in this window. I mean, Celtic will have their reasons. Celtic may have their reasons for not going in for him. They might have just, the interest might just cooled late on. I don't know that for sure, but that it seems to be the case. But they never came in for him. Sidney van Hooijdonk went to Norwich. For Norwich to do that deal, they needed to get Idah away, and that opened the door for Celtic to get Adam Idah on loan. And that's just the way it worked out. And the whole strategy, the strategy was obviously to get permanent signings for left back and striker that were going to be pushing for starting places. Rodgers was quoted in terms of saying that they wanted 3 or 4 quality players, starting players that are going to push for starting places. That didn't happen. So, of course, I have no doubt that people at the club will be disappointed and frustrated that they weren't able to do so.
Yeah, and I think optics are so important in this day and age, Anthony. It's a cliche term, isn't it? But what supporters see, because there's a lack of communication, in my opinion, from Celtic at important times. And I think in times like that, supporters like myself and others fill in the blanks. And I suppose just that deal you mentioned, it looked like we were going for Sidney van Hooijdonk. Folks were quite excited about it. There was a natural link with his dad and what he done at Celtic and what he achieved. And then the fact that not only do you miss out on the guy, but it seems that you're getting the downgrade on him. So i.e. he's been brought to Norwich because Norwich see him as the guy to fill in their striker slot. And the guy who happens to be subject to the requirements, Adam Idah, then becomes ours. So it's almost like we're getting Norwich's hand-me-downs, if you like, with all due respect to Adam Idah, who I really do hope does well. Adam Idah, I think he's unfortunate in terms of his signings catching a bit of flack, but it's nothing to do with Adam Idah in terms of how Celtic operate their business. And I do hope the fans will give him their full backing while he's here. But you mentioned there, it got to halfway during the window, and it seemed that the club switched their focus to saying, okay, there's guys we want that don't seem to be available. Let's now look at potential loan options in the second half of the window. There's a question from one of our own guys, Joe Clark, and Joe's basically asked that in Angie's time, it did seem that targets were being identified well in advance of any given window. What has now changed in terms of how Celtic do their business? So, for me, Anthony, should Celtic not be sounding out these guys in October, November, December, with a view to then making the bid early part of the month? Or are we waiting until January starts and then sounding out Bologna's and various other clubs? Do you have any insight as to why the change in how Celtic operate?
I'll answer the other part first. Through intermediaries, contact is made, so it's not official. There's no, it's not considered tapping up and things like that. I think everyone knows through intermediaries, agencies are able to speak to agencies that are working with clubs and players and say, oh, this player could be available, or would this player be interested in a move to Celtic, with this player, that kind of thing. So that still goes on. That hasn't changed. That still happens in between transfer windows and everything like that. But I mean, if you where to understand what's changed and what's needed to change and to understand everything, I think we need to go back all the way to when Don Mackay came in to Celtic and was speaking about modernising the football club. And I feel this is where the issues begin. Not with this, not with Don Mackay's plan, but in terms of where Celtic went from that. And so Don Mackay came in with this vision, needing us, wanting to modernise the football club, wanting to modernise the structure of the football department. He wanted a sporting director in. He wanted someone who was a sporting director, someone who was going to sort of head the football department and would deal with transfers, deal with the heads of recruitment, and be the person doing the deals like many modern European football clubs do, most do. And that vision was there. It was said to be at the time welcomed by the club, but for whatever reason, Don Mackay didn't last too long at Celtic. And I think a lot of people have read between the lines as to maybe why that might have been the case. Maybe he was looking for too much change too soon, and the club weren't ready for it. So he had that vision. He was wanting definitely a sporting director who would be seen as someone who's there for 7 to 10 years. I remember when I did the story on the Queen's Park director of football leaving for Ajax, a lot of people were saying, why was he on a 10-year contract? A 10-year contract? Well, do you know what? A sporting director should be on a 10-year contract, because a sporting director should be there beyond the next manager and thinking about who's going to take over when this manager's in. What's the succession plan? What's the 5 to 10-year plan here? That's what a sporting director does. What is the squad going to look like in 4 years? And then what's going to be the cycle after that? Because squads usually change within 3-4 years. You don't want to be doing a rebuild every single season, and Celtic seem to be heading that way at the moment. And so Don Mackay left, and Celtic had Ange Postecoglou in, who operates in a more old school way and is more in control of everything around the football club. Very little micromanagement of the squad, but in terms of the whole football club and the direction that they go in, he wanted a say. He wanted to be part of the discussions and be a main player there and have control, essentially have full control. That is great because it worked. It worked for Celtic, but it was only going to work while Ange Postecoglou was there. Unless you're going to get another manager like Ange Postecoglou, which is so rare to find these days. Managers like to be head coaches these days. They don't want to deal with the business side anymore. Most modern football managers, they want to just coach players and put on a team that's going to win, put out a team that's going to win football matches. That's what they want to focus their jobs on these days, because there's so much pressure in football management. But Ange took it all on, and that's his style. But I said it plenty of times when Ange was manager, I do worry about what the succession plan is after Ange, because he's pretty much in control of everything. Yeah. And what happens after that, because it's very rare to find a manager. I mean, Ange Postecoglou was 1 in a million. I genuinely believe he's one of the top football managers in world football. Celtic were very astute to get him in, and also very privileged to have him for 2 years. But what was Celtic's plan for after Ange? And when you don't have a sporting director, you don't have that visionary of within the football department, then you're not really going to get that. If you've got the chief executive and board members doing the deals, head of recruitment, even part of the deals, it's just not going to be the same. It's not going to be that. There's no figurehead. A lot of agents and other sporting directors are looking for they're looking for to speak to the sporting director of the football club to see whether their player or their client is going to be a fit, or whether they can do business. That's the way modern football clubs operate now. And since Don Mackay left, it seems to be that there's no appetite for a sporting director at Celtic. And people will ask it, well, why do they need to modernise the structure. They're very successful domestically. They try to do Europe might be seen as a bonus and things like that. And many fans are happy for Celtic to just dominate domestically. But I think there's definitely a real urge amongst the majority of the support to do something a bit more. And that is to do something in Europe. And I feel that Celtic are a bit behind with it in terms of their structure. And until that changes, that will always be the case. You look at, and I've said this many times before, even on your podcast here, that you look at the likes of Benfica and Ajax. Yes, Ajax are having a bit of an exception to the rule season at the moment, but they are picking up again. They consistently develop players, sell them, get a turn out of them in terms of doing well in Europe, winning their league titles, winning their domestic cups, and selling them directly to the elite. Celtic's latest track record is selling their best players to Brentford, Southampton, Crystal Palace, the likes. No offense to those clubs, but Celtic almost need to be able to pick themselves. I mean, Celtic are one of the biggest football clubs in the world in terms of fan base, but in terms of stature in the modern game, they need to pick themselves up among the food chain of being just a selling club to the likes of Southampton, Crystal Palace, Brentford, who then sell on to the elite and need to sell directly to the elite, but also get a turnout of the players that they're developing and bringing in from clubs if they're signing players for £2-3 million. So for that to happen, they need the structure to change. They need to operate similarly to the likes of Benfica, the likes of Ajax. And so, I mean, Celtic are buying directly from Benfica B. Yeah. Celtic got Jota from Benfica B. Celtic got Bernardo from Benfica B. Aberdeen got Duke from Benfica B. So surely Celtic want to be a club where clubs are wanting their B team players for £6 million. Do you know what I mean? Maybe I'm living in a dreamland. Maybe I'm maybe my fan head is too engaged at the moment when I'm speaking about this. But I just feel like going forward, there needs to be a change in structure. But again, what I will say, and what we were was definitely being briefed in the summer when Rodgers was coming in before the window, was that this Rodgers has bought into the European model, and it wasn't necessarily meaning this season. The European model, this is next season's Champions League, where we know there can be up to 10 games in the not up to 10 games, possibly more, but Celtic should be looking at least 10 games in the Champions League next season from September to January, £60 million. And we'll maybe talk about it later, but Matt O'Reilly probably isn't going to be around in the summer. If Celtic are looking for a record fee, let's say 30 million. Say they win the league. It's imperative that Celtic win the league this season to get that £60 million Champions League money. And if they sell O'Reilly, that's another £30 million. You could have £90 million there. And that could see bigger changes and a bigger change in how they attack transfer windows, how they go for players and say, well, look, you're going to have a fifth-year season in the Champions League. We can give you more money as well. And you might see higher fees. I think a lot of people were expecting that last summer, and that didn't happen. But I think very much what I was being told, Rodgers is here for the European ambition, and that very much comes in with next season's Champions League. But again, I understand what the fans are saying. Celtic are playing with fire here about this season's Scottish Premiership, because it's not a foregone conclusion that Celtic are going to win the league this season. And at one point they were, 10 points ahead? Around
Something
September,
like that.
October time. So they were in such a strong position, and they seem to be not any stronger after this January window, and Rangers are winning games every week with a new manager. So I've talked a lot there, but I just feel there's a wider issue that we're seeing being played out in this January window, but there's a wider issue of Celtic missing out their targets, the way Celtic are going, but there is hope if they win the league this season and have access to that Champions League money.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the frustration, Anthony. And, you've got fairly passionate about a few things there because naturally, as you say, your fan head comes through there when you see the frustrations that, yeah, there's potentially 90 million just round the corner for Celtic. If they cash in on O'Reilly, which summer seems his natural shelf life, and that's life at Celtic, and then potentially the 60 million for the new Champions League format. But Celtic are now dicing with that. They're gambling with that, which just seems madness. And it brings back the frustration that we're all feeling just now that surely we could and should have pushed the boat out even just a wee bit during this January window. And I get all the chat, difficult window, teams don't want to sell. We've taken the same approach by holding Matt O'Reilly ourselves, etc., etc. But there's players out there, and it just seems like Celtic, as is often the case, haven't been willing to push the boat out. But it's not I'm not asking Celtic, there's the 70 odd million in the bank, and I understand some's put aside for tax and all that stuff, but there's a chunk of cash in the bank. And I'm not saying Celtic should go out and spend 30, 40, 50 or anything like that. But can we spend 7 and 8 and 9, something like that, to potentially then get 60? And you don't need to be the biggest gambler in town to see that as a balanced and fairly low-risk strategy. But as always, Celtic seem to be behind the curve. And you're right, Anthony, a lot of it coincides with the fact that Ange Postecoglou was and is a unique football manager. Celtic were very lucky to get him. We had brilliant times and real success, certainly initially with him. His latter 2 transfer windows, not quite as successful, but certainly some real success. And a big part of that for me is the fact that time after time when guys were signing for Ange, you then get the quotes in the press in the days that follow, and the players would say, I spoke to the manager and he sold me on the project here and convinced me how much he wanted me, and that was part of it. I think, guys like Juranovic spoke like that, Matt O'Reilly spoke like that, and various others. And this isn't a slight on Brendan Rodgers. I'm a huge fan of Brendan Rodgers, but that's not his style. I don't think he gets involved in those negotiations. So that figurehead, that passionate football guy, that de facto director of football, to convince players and their agents that this is a place for them to be. Celtic don't have that. I don't know Matt Lawwell personally, but I don't think he's that guy. I don't think he's that personality. And that's no slight again, because it's not easy to be like Ange, but we need somebody of that nature at the club to be the figurehead for the deals and so much more. I think we must move forward as a club in terms of embracing a more modern structure. But Celtic continually, fail to modernise. And, I've used the term a few times now. If you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got. Uninspiring transfer windows, lack of progress in Europe, and that's where we find ourselves. What we'll do, Anthony, I'll try and somehow bring us back on track.
Just on that, and I'll say this in jest, but when you were talking about Ange selling the club to the players really well, if Celtic are struggling with that, I would urge Celtic just to show the first half of the game 2 years ago today when Celtic beat Rangers 3-0 on a Wednesday night at Celtic Park. Show them the first half of that, 45 minutes. And if a player doesn't want to join Celtic after that, they don't want to play football.
Yeah, it was absolutely electric, wasn't it? It was Real Hatate get a couple, Leah Labada just before half-time. You were 3-0 and cruising. A very rare night game for Celtic v Rangers. Automatically goes in as one of my top 5 ever as a Celtic fan. I thought it was just incredible on the night, and Ange Postecoglou was a huge reason behind that. And those nights are still possible, albeit without Ange, but I do believe we lack that personality. Brendan Rodgers is charismatic. He's got a big personality, but I don't think he wants to be the head coach that you spoke of. He doesn't want to be the deal broker and the guy that makes these things happen. So there's a gap there. There's something missing for Celtic, and that might be the reason why we've potentially missed out on guys this window and beyond. Just to summarise on that part then, Anthony, you've mentioned Owen Beck. We potentially could have got him. A couple of other left-backs were mentioned. Is it Levin Kurzawa at PSG, Hugo Bueno at Wolves, and then strikers-wise, Van Hooijdonk we've touched on, Kviestgaarden we've touched on, Majovski and Shankland were mentioned. I don't know if the club were ever in for them, but just as a general, Anthony, a quick summary of it, do you think that Celtic went for any of these guys and missed out, weren't able to get the deal done, or even maybe some guys that I've not mentioned?
So they went in for Hugo Bueno at Wolves the day before deadline day, and Wolves didn't want to let him go. They were looking for a loan deal there. Wolves weren't prepared to let him go, so that was not back Kurzawa at PSG was offered to the club by his agency because PSG had asked him to find a club. But when Celtic looked into it a bit more, understood that PSG were wanting his full wages covered and a loan fee as well, a significant loan fee at that. But his wages, I think, have been talked about. I don't know for sure, but have been talked about and quoted in Parisian press as 80 to £100,000 a week. So I think that was a non-starter. Maybe without a loan fee, that's okay, because say you're doing £80,000 a week and not paying a fee, that's like paying £2 million for a player for the rest of the season. Yeah. But I don't think Celtic were prepared to do that, and they didn't go for it. So, yeah, that's in terms of Shankland. No, there was no approach from Celtic as Shankland. I don't think Lawrence Shankland would join Celtic either. He was liking pictures of Rangers lifting the League Cup on Instagram. I think his allegiances are very much set in stone. Yeah. And it's clear where he actually wants to move if he's going to move. But Miovski, an interesting one, because he's a player who's not just doing well in the Scottish Premiership, isn't just a proven talent in the Scottish Premiership. He's done it in Europe and he's done it at international level as well. Yeah. And he is a player that is one of the top players in the Scottish Premiership. Clearly is. But there's a Celtic tax. If Celtic were to come in, there's a Celtic tax. I think Aberdeen, from what I understand, would have, if an English Championship team came in for him or a club in Europe, would have settled on about 5 to 6 million. If Celtic were coming in, you're talking about 8 to 9 million. So I think that's also a non-starter. I don't think Celtic are going to pay 8 to 9 million for a player in the Scottish Premiership, especially when they've got, it's not the first choice. Kyogo is the first choice striker. O is second choice striker. They're essentially looking for a backup, who's going to push. But that's essentially a backup, and whoever comes in would know that they were going to do it. So that was also another reason I think perhaps it was more difficult for Celtic to bring in a striker of the quality that they were maybe looking for, or of not the quality, because I don't want to dismiss Adam Idah completely, but of the caliber, perhaps on paper, of what they were looking for. But I'm told that they missed out on quite a few targets for left back and striker this season. While we got some names came out, I'm sure many others in terms of putting out feelers and all that were knocked back or just weren't doable. And to play devil's advocate as well here, and what would we as Celtic fans want? Would we want Celtic to go and just buy someone for the sake of it? Would we want Celtic to overspend? I mean, not even Man City, who've got all the riches in the world, overspend. They have a value for a player and will never go above it. They'll walk away from deals. Like Declan Rice, they had a specific value for Declan Rice, and West Ham wanted more than that. Man City walked away. They weren't prepared to get Declan Rice. No matter how much they want a player, they're not prepared to pay over what they value a player at. Celtic are not going to panic buy. Celtic are not going to pay over the odds for a player. They're not just going to bring someone in for £3-4 million that they don't believe is going to add to the squad. They spent £3 million on a player who was one of their main targets, and that was Nicolas Kuhn. And that's when they go in and spend money.
Yeah, and I think I agree to an extent with you there in terms of, when you're negotiating, you should have a break point that shoe maxed out, and you shouldn't be held over a barrel by anybody. But that's, beyond that, that's where I think, from the outside looking in, Celtic are failing to have a target 1, target 2, and target 3. And if the club or the player or the agent involved with target 1 are just playing hardball or just too difficult to deal with and you can't get a deal on, you need to move to your secondary or your third target. And that's where I feel Celtic, have this gap. They don't seem to have, it's more of a scattergun approach. We'll jump over here for this guy, and if that doesn't work out, we'll just walk away and there's nothing left in the aftermath. And then we'll maybe jump over here for this guy. And it just seems to be a strategy that's lacking in terms of, being a well thought out approach. As I say, it just seems to be a wee bit sketchy, a wee bit jumping around and seeing what sticks. I've mentioned the fact that, and you can look at the Starfelt exit, Lagerbielke incoming time at Celtic as what I call an agent-led deal. We've followed the same agent that tracks both of those players. We've taken his advice rather than what I call a player-led approach. And I'm no football recruitment guy, but surely it makes sense to use all the systems and processes and technology to identify the exact type of left back you need. What kind of player is he? What's his pace like? What's his tackling like? What's his strength? What's his weaknesses? What's his age? What's his potential sell-on value? What's his wage structure? All these kind of things. And I'm sure a bit of software can tell you that fairly quickly in this day and age, and then go and focus on the 2 or 3 targets in those areas, rather than looking to, I don't know the name of Starfelt's agent, apologies, but someone like him or Dudu Dahan, who's became cliched in Celtic circles for all the business we've done with him. We cannot take the lead from the agent. You need to take the lead from the player in question in terms of his qualities, and then follow that. And I just think that's where Celtic fall down. And to round it off though, yeah, right, we shouldn't pay over the odds, but we shouldn't walk away at the first sign of someone playing hardball with us, because we play hardball with everybody else. It's part of negotiations. It's part of life. It's not just football clubs. Sometimes you need to go the extra wee bit, and Celtic continually fail to do so. I'll say it again. Do what you've always done. Get what you've always got.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I was a way to say is that, like, maybe they have learned from the Lagerbielke situation in terms of that. That is why they weren't going to, because I'm sure many agents would have pitched their players to Celtic knowing publicly that they were looking for a left back and a striker. The Lagerbielke one, I mean, I don't even have the words to describe it really, but it was nothing more than a rushed move. Starfelt was desperate to leave and found a club that wasn't in Portugal, but close enough, that was going to take him. And so for him, it was a case of I'm going. And Celtic, the cost of that whole thing it's proven quite costly, hasn't it? Because what kind of fee, had that not been rushed, what kind of fee would Starfelt have possibly gone for? You'd say maximum £10 million, maybe? Could Celtic got £10 million out of Starfelt? I think so. He was a really good player. So they sold him for around £4 million. So and then brought Lagerbielke in a rush deal based on the agent's recommendation for £3 million. So if Celtic as that deal costs Celtic like £9 million, that whole process of selling Starfelt for a cut price and bringing in Lagerbielke and him not being up to what the Celtic the standard that Rodgers wants, clearly. Yeah. And with Lagerbielke, I mean, they've got themselves in a right pickle here as well now. I know he is training, so it is good. He hasn't down tools as such, but he was at training today. But Lagerbielke went from scoring the winner against Feyenoord, wanting to push for a starting slot, for sort of feeling on a high, my understanding was, and at the start of January, not wanting to leave and wanting to push for a starting place in the team. And he was like third, fourth choice. So, I mean, an injury or two, which has happened, and he'll be in the team. So he went from not wanting to leave at the start of January or not keen on a move, especially a loan move, to being desperate to go, from what you've seen in his quotes in the Italian newspapers.
Yeah, I would call it a saga. I think it's been a saga with Lagerbielke from start to finish, as we mentioned there, how he came in and what's happened in the last few days. And I suppose it's epitomised by that Feyenoord week. He scores the winner in the Champions League. I think it was the 13th of December against Feyenoord. 3 days later, we take on Hearts. Again, we end up losing, and he's not even in the squad. It's just, someone could go for that alone. So, someone could lose their job for how that's played out in itself. And I suppose it's maybe symptomatic of the fact that there's so much going wrong at the moment, Anthony. What we'll do, just to get back on track, I'll just run through quickly some of the exits that the club have successfully, moved on, or guys that they've moved on during this window. Idah at the start of the window, back to Japan, 800k, all good there. Qantas St Mirren, interesting one. Let's see how he goes. We can keep an eye on him at close quarters, just across in Paisley. Adam Montgomery, tough one for him. Went to Motherwell, started, scored an assist in his first game. Looks like he's picked up a bad injury, so tough one for him to take. Tellio confirmed yesterday, I think, that he's gone back to Melbourne City for a time. Mikey Johnson goes to West Brom. And I suppose the biggest exit is David Turnbull. He's gone for a couple of million to Cardiff, and he was in the final months of his deal. Let's just focus on Turnbull for a minute, if you don't mind, Anthony. He was clearly a player on the fringes at Celtic. You know, he did start the season, didn't he? He played the first game against Ross County, then second game against Aberdeen. But since then, he's been in and out. Albeit, he is Celtic's third top scorer, I believe. You know, converted a few penalties. And now he's no longer an option. But as we've seen, Rio Hatate is also not an option. I think he's going to be out for 8 weeks, apparently, with a calf injury. I think David Turnbull's time was up at Celtic, but now, very quickly, does it look folly to let him go, you know, given what's going on at the moment?
I think you can see it both ways, and I think you can only see it as a negative given the context of Hatate's injury, and Celtic couldn't have anticipated that Hatate injury. Yeah, you could anticipate, he could pick up an injury, but like that, it's so unfortunate that Hatate got injured playing for Japan the day before the window closes, and now we discover it's going to be around a couple of months he's out for. So, but the positive is getting £2 million up to £2 million for a player who was in the last few months of his contract. I actually think that's really good business from the board in the current situation, in the circumstances. He had 6 months left in his contract. He wasn't signing a new deal. He was free to speak to clubs outside of Scotland to sign a pre-contract. He'd already gone quite advanced with Cardiff on that. So Cardiff knew they were going to be getting him. So they just wanted to bring him in straight away. And despite playing a decent role so far this season, you can definitely say he's made his mark this season for when he has played. Cardiff wanted him in now, and he wants to be in the Scotland squad for the Euros, and he wants to play games. And I don't think you can stand in David Turnbull's way when you're getting £2 million for him with 5-6 months left in his contract. So I think £2 million for him is pretty good, to be honest. And it's just so unfortunate, and possibly sums up the window for Celtic, just talking about that situation. David Turnbull goes, he would have been the sort of backup central midfielder, but they got £2 million for him. And then we learn today that Hatate is out for around 2 months. So it's just really unfortunate. And I don't know. I'm sort of caught in two minds about it, because I guess some fans and some people could rightly say, and they'd have a valid point as well, if someone's away at a tournament and there's a chance you can get injured, you shouldn't be in a situation where your backups are gone, or so you're selling your backups. But then I also see 5 months left on his contract and being offered £2 million. And for a player that is wanting to move, not going to sign a new deal, and wants to be in the Scotland squad for the Euros, I think there's a duty of care there for the players as well that has to be considered.
Yeah, and I can see both sides. I really can. And I've thought the writing has been on the wall for David Turnbull for a while. I genuinely wish him all the best. I think he's a talented guy. He's been unlucky, I think. His big injury that Celtic identified before trying to sign him first time around, I think it has hampered him. And I think he lacks that, you know, that dynamic, that burst of pace that you need to make it at the top level. And I think he's fallen just short. But he can be proud of what he achieved at Celtic, scored some big goals for us. And I hope he does find game time, and I hope he finds his way back into the Scotland team, because he's a talented Scottish player, you know, and we all hope that they, you know, continue to do well. There are other exits that were rumoured and suggested for a variety of different reasons haven't gone through. Lagerbielke we've covered, and what a frustration that must be for a guy that clearly just wants to play football. James McCarthy had a move to Greece fallen through. Apparently the Celtic were playing hardball on how much of his wages were covered. Rocco Vata, there was chat about Serie A. Bernabe, Serie A as well. But the two that interest me, and we'll focus on the latter here, Abada and James Forrest. Abada might or might not, you know, find a move permanently or otherwise come summer. But I was really surprised to see the headline about James Forrest. It was only over the last 24 hours or so that it was suggested that he might be joining David Turnbull down at Cardiff City. And I think as much as James has been on the fringes of Celtic this season, it kind of caught a lot of us off guard that he was been, by the looks of it, made available to transfer. Have you heard much on that, Anthony? And, does the player potentially, like others, just want to play football at this late stage in his career?
All I know really about that is that if a club came in with a decent offer, then Celtic were willing to listen to it. I don't think there was anything in the Cardiff link. I even saw links to Aberdeen. I'd be surprised if they could cover his wages. Perhaps maybe a loan deal could have been struck there, but there was no approach. There was no bid. No club came in for James Forrest, as far as I'm aware. But yes, I think if a club did, Celtic would have been willing to discuss it. That's as far as I know, and that's as far as I believe it to be the case. I don't think it was Celtic were actively trying to sell him. Open to offers was what I was being told. The James McCarthy one is very strange, and I laughed at a lot of the quote tweets I was getting when we broke that news that James McCarthy, Celtic had rejected a bid from the Greek side for James McCarthy, a loan bid. I understand that Celtic were wanting a bit more of his wages to be paid, but the Greek team were not prepared to do that, so it was rejected. Other players that I guess could have gone out. I mean, Stephen Welsh. I understand Celtic very quickly knocked back a loan with option to buy bid from a team in Germany for him. Okay. I mean, Celtic knocked back a few bids now over the years from the likes of Udinese and Toulouse, all loan with option to buy bids. There's something that the European leagues, Italy, France, Germany, they like about Stephen Welsh. But there's a lot that Celtic like about him as well. So they've kept him, they've signed him on a new deal. They're in a strong position. But I think we could see more interest in Welsh in the summer as well. And then I guess the big one was, I guess, what we talked about the last the show we did before the window. And you asked me for my predictions on what was going to happen in this window, and I did say I thought Celtic would get a left back and a striker and possibly on loan. Didn't happen. Mm-hmm. And one thing I did say is I thought Celtic would be tested on Matt O'Reilly, and that happened. Yes. Very much tested. And this, for me, showed strong resilience from the club. They were always in a strong position to keep him in this window, having just signed a bumper new 4-year contract. And then Atletico Madrid came in with that loan bid with an obligation to buy for around £20 million. Double what Leeds United were offering in the summer. Yeah. Celtic value him a lot higher than that, and they'd be seeking a record fee, I'm told. And so what you're talking ballpark, at least starting point, 25 to 30 million pounds. Mm-hmm. They insisted he was not for sale in this window. They were very strong with that in terms of their stance with Girona, who were at the time La Liga leaders and are still chasing the title, and Atletico Madrid, who can only be classed as an elite club. Yeah, the club. Celtic spoke to O'Reilly. Rodgers talking about that, speaking to O'Reilly the day the bid came in, and my understanding is that he was happy to stay. I think. Without knowing what the conversation happened, I think we can sort of generalize and say, well, look, because my understanding is Celtic are not going to stand in his way of him joining an elite club if the right offer comes in. They just weren't prepared to sell in this window. I think he's basically been told, help us win the league, get us into that lucrative Champions League format next season, and if a club comes in with a record fee, we won't stand in your way. And if I just think that's going to be the case, I'll be very surprised if Matt O'Reilly is still at Celtic beyond the summer deadline. Because, I mean, the question will be actually is if someone's going to try and snap him up before or after the Euros. Because if he has a good second half of the season and a good Euros with Denmark, his value will skyrocket. And I mean, they're going to be playing England. They're going to be on. He's going to be on the world stage. I know he's been on the world stage at the Champions League and one man in the match, and that's why clubs like Atletico Madrid are coming in for him. But you could see a bidding war if he is still at Celtic during the Euros and he is performing well at Euro 2024, which Celtic would welcome, of course, because that could see a real record-breaking transfer fee coming in. And I just think it's inevitable that O'Reilly's going to leave in the summer, but I think it shows strong resilience. And also kudos to Matt O'Reilly as well for not throwing the toys out the pram and thinking this would be his only chance to join, or this is his best chance of joining an elite club. He believes in himself. He's very happy at Celtic. He wants to win the league. He wants to win the Scottish Cup. He wants to be part of a double winning Celtic side this season and to progress under Rodgers. He's a player that has developed well under Rodgers as well. And I think his big move will be waiting for him in the summer.
Yeah, I think there's zero chance of Matt O'Reilly remaining a Celtic player beyond the summer. But I think from everybody's point of view, it's kind of the model at Celtic, and it's the perfect example of the model. That would be him having seen out 2.5 full seasons. He signed January 2 years ago, didn't he? So that'd be 2.5 full seasons, won everything there is to win. He's well on course to being player of the year for the whole of Scotland, let alone for Celtic, for the current campaign. And what I think is really exciting, Anthony, you mentioned earlier on in the piece about Celtic selling to Brentford, to Southampton, to Crystal Palace. By no means elite clubs, having to go to this middle ground, and they would then sell on to the big hitters, beyond their time at Celtic. For Matt O'Reilly, it paints a different picture, and it does show young, talented footballers from England or elsewhere. You can come to Celtic, you can develop as a player for a couple of years, you can hit the Champions League stage, you can be capped for your country, and you can then go to, as you rightly say, a genuine elite club. And that's what Atletico are. Whether you like Diego Simeone or not and how they behave as a club, different story. They're a huge club. I was at the away game there when we got hammered, which wasn't much fun, but what an arena, what a place to play football, the Metropolitano. And it's hard for Matt O'Reilly or any player to knock back that kind of move. And I think he'll move on for big figures in the summer, and rightly so. So let's watch that space. But I think he's a balanced young guy, and I think he'll give us all for Celtic in the remaining months of this season.
And doesn't Matt O'Reilly just prove how important it is to have that forward planning of backup options where in a transfer window? In another world, Celtic would have Riley McGree at the moment.
Correct.
And not saying he wouldn't be a good player or anything like that, but it's hard to envisage anyone having the success that Matt O'Reilly's had, or having the growth and development that Matt O'Reilly had, and also the maturity of a player that is his age. And that forward planning of Juranovic is going, bringing Alistair Johnston before he's even gone, that forward planning of Giacomakis is leaving, bringing that forward planning of Riley McGree has turned us down next couple of hours, I believe it was, straight on to Matt O'Reilly. He's our next target. We're going for him. And that, I mean, it sums it up how, and then to sell to possibly an elite club. That's what you want. That's what Celtic fans are looking for as a model, as the benchmark. Backup options, backup players for bringing in if you're going to be selling people, and selling to elite clubs for record fees, having developed and gotten a lot out of a player, which Matt O'Reilly has done. Won the treble last season and could win the double this season. So that's all I feel. I mean, it can't work every time. Of course it can't work every time. But you want a better hit rate, don't you?
You absolutely do. And again, it just, it stresses the importance of having that strategy, a strategy which does seem to have disappeared in recent windows. There's always reasons why you won't get your first target, Riley McGree being our first target at the time, but let's see what option 2 and option 3 do, and you can have some real successes through that, as Matt O'Reilly proves. The other last bit of news, Anthony, and we won't dwell on it, but it is a positive for Celtic, of course, is Cameron Carter-Vickers signed what I think is quite a huge extension, a 5.5.5.5 year extension, keeping him at the club until 2029, which seems like a long way away. It looks like he's picked up a knock, frustratingly at this moment in time, but a hugely important player for Celtic. And again, it's good business because it protects the asset if someone does come in from at some point in the near future. I just want to round things off, Anthony. There's been a number of questions that came in this morning through Twitter, TikTok, and various other places, but I just want to catch, there's several that we could catch, but time-wise, I just want to catch two, which I think are particularly interesting. The first one comes from Greg Harvey, someone I know well, and Greg's asked, Anthony, given your own knowledge of the transfer market and the various deals that have been done over the last few weeks, if you personally had between 6 and 10 million to spend on just one player for Celtic during this window, who would it have been and why? Does anyone jump out for you?
Oh God, that really puts me on the spot. 6 to 10 million. It's a good job this is a record and not live. I might take a couple of minutes to think of it. Do you know what? I would, if I had 6 to 10 million, I would have maybe looked at bringing in, maybe not necessarily in this window, but looking at like the likes of Kelleher at Liverpool and bringing in a goalkeeper, because that is actually going to be a real dilemma for Celtic. Because I think I'd be surprised if Joe Hart is still at Celtic next season, and Scott Bain and Siegrist are not going to be the number one. And I think it's a very important position that often gets overlooked, especially at a club like Celtic where they're attacking most of the time. But quite often you see how important it is when we've seen Joe Hart have his moments latterly in his Celtic career. Yeah, interesting. Oh, that really puts me in the spot, and I'm sorry to your mate that I wasn't able to answer that well. But my head is not in that kind of place at the moment, straight after the January window.
And I think in terms of goalkeeper, though, just to stay on that, I think a lot of fans would be more than happy if Celtic went big for that position. You obviously get Joe Hart on a free, well, £1 million, I think, did we spend to Spurs? My mistake, but he's played his part absolutely. But the time has come, to replace Joe Hart and for him to move on or potentially fall into the backroom team. That depends what he wants to do personally. But it's such a big position. It's so important, and less so for some of the domestic stuff, although, now and then you'll be called on for some big moments. But when you want to go to that Champions League stage and compete, you need a top quality goalkeeper. You'll get found out very quickly if you don't. And I think most would be happy if a good chunk of Celtic's budget this summer went on a quality proven goalkeeper. We cannot and will never now be able to sign Liverpool's number one or a number one for a top club, but we can look at the number two, the backup guys, and that's where Kelleher and players of his ilk fall into place. And I think Celtic could do worse, a lot worse, than spend a reasonable figure to invest in what's such a key area. I'll bring you the second question, Anthony. Yeah,
Dominic Livakovic was available at 5.7 million.
Yes, he was.
That's less than that budget I was given there. It's the players are available, and at the prices as well for Celtic's budget. Celtic do have a decent transfer budget, and it's another player for striker. Maybe would have, if you had 6 to 10 million, maybe would have gone for Miovski as well. So that's that maybe answers the striker position for that question.
Yeah. The last question, and it's a big question, and I think it's one that might be on the lips of many fans at this moment in time. It's from Paul Todd on Twitter. Paul's a big fan of the show, and the question is Brendan Rodgers' position as Celtic manager now untenable, given his repeated calls for quality additions in the lead up to the January window? And actually, not just Brendan Rodgers, Anthony, Callum McGregor, spoke. He was quoted as saying, we need quality additions and hopefully the club can bring them in. But from Rodgers, as the manager, he's repeatedly used the term quality. He's mentioned up to 4 players. You could debate that he's got one in Nicolas Kuhn, less so for Adam Idah. Where does that leave him? We're recording just now, lunchtime on Friday. Brendan Rodgers is very possibly speaking to the press at this very moment, and it's going to be so fascinating what position he takes now, because to a huge extent, I think he's been sold short again by the club, and I don't want to say they've made him look foolish, but it does look again like they've failed to back him. So what do you think of his position? Is it untenable? Is that too extreme?
I think that's extreme. I don't think it's untenable. I think he'll be very disappointed that with the way the window's gone. It will be interesting to hear what he says about it. I think you're still only going to get, there might be just, I think what you might get from him is that difficult window. The targets weren't available. They're not going to overpay. Yes, they wanted a left back and a striker in, but if the targets that they want aren't available, they're not just going to bring in anyone. And yeah, I think that'll very much be the club's stance publicly, but deep down there will be disappointment, of course. And it's just one of those things. And like I said, it's to play devil's advocate. And this is by no means what I feel. I think I've made my feelings quite clear in this podcast today. But to play devil's advocate, the club would be saying things like, well, we're not just going to overspend. They're not just going to get anyone. If the targets aren't available in this window, then that's just. I think there is still a confidence within the club that this squad is good enough to win the league, and I personally think this squad's good enough to win the league. It should be. It just should be. I feel as fans, we should be a bit more confident. Not in the squad. I'm meaning because business should have had a better window, and Celtic should be in a stronger position. So I'm not saying Celtic fans should be more confident in this squad. I'm saying things should have happened. Business should have been better in the summer and in January. They were in such a strong position over Rangers, and now that doesn't seem to be the case. So frustration, disappointment, even anger is very much understandable.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just, while we're chatting there, as I say, Brendan Rodgers is probably speaking at this very moment. And I'll be surprised if I'm wrong, but I think there's going to be a bit of, transfer window bingo going on. And I've got a few things that I think will come up. Difficult window is definitely a term that will be used. We wanted quality, not quantity. Happy with who we have. We won't be held to ransom, and we'll revisit in summer. There's 4 or 5 different phrases there. And I think Brendan Rodgers will use most, if not all of them, this afternoon. Anthony, it's been great to catch up as always. We really appreciate you always giving us this time, during the transfer windows, which are so important for a club like Celtic for so many reasons. But I know you'll be really keen, to get off on your break, and it's a well-earned break after the last few weeks. So just your final thoughts at this moment in time as we start to wrap this one up.
Final thoughts on the transfer window?
On everything. Go big.
On everything. Oh, it's been there was so much hope, I think, going into this season. After there was obviously disappointment when Ange left, but there was hope when Rodgers was coming in, briefing about Champions League transfer budgets and this European ambition. It's been underwhelming from Celtic, but there's also another way of looking at it. Have Celtic won their key games in terms of maybe they have done better than Champions League this season? I know that's a stretch to say. They've won away at Ibrox, they've won away at Aberdeen, they've won away at Hearts, they've won at home to Rangers, they're still top of the league. I think Celtic still have the strongest squad in the league. It just should be in a better place, in my opinion. They haven't had the best windows in the summer and in January. And I mean, there's nothing else they can do. They've just got to go and show what they've got. They kept players like Matt O'Reilly. They've got Carter-Vickers on a long-term deal. There are some positives to be had. I don't think it's all doom and gloom. It's just a case of Celtic better win the league now. I think it's imperative for Celtic to win the league to have access to this new Champions League format, have access to that new money available, that big, huge jackpot of £60 million, and also know that they've got prized assets who elite clubs are looking at to sell on and then have more money to bring in better players. And that's all Celtic fans can hope for now, I think. Just for Celtic to go out and win the league and show what they've got and show a bit of fight, a bit of desire and a bit of swagger that has been missing from the squad, which Celtic fans were used to for 2 years straight. under Ange. And that's my final thoughts. There's no other choice but to, the window's closed. Can't bring anyone else in. They've got to go with what they've got. I still think it's the strongest squad in the league. And there can only be hope that they go out and win the league.
Yeah, and I think we'd love to see that swagger come back. There was indications it was on the way back after the win against Rangers on the 30th. That might have dipped slightly. But you're right, Anthony. It's easy to get caught up in the doom and gloom. There most definitely are positives to be taken. It just doesn't feel like that way at this moment in time. But hopefully, by the next time you and I speak, there's a whole lot more to be cheerful about. Anthony, as always, thanks for joining us here in the Celtic Exchange. Thanks to everyone who's tuned in for this one. We'll be back across the weekend with the Final Whistle show after that trip to Pittodrie. We'll also be back, as always, with the weekly show on Monday night, where we'll cover the transfer window and much more in a lot of detail. But in the meantime, for myself and Anthony, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again very soon.
Thanks for having me on, Tino.